For a second straight night, anger, outrage, and a heavy police presence. Shots fired as tear gas filled the streets the day Michael Brown was to have started college.
Nothing can justify what he did to my son. Nothing. Nothing.
The flashpoint remains red hot in the town of Ferguson, Missouri, as police continue their investigation into the shooting of an unarmed black teenager. The community is still on edge after one night of looting and a second night of tension, replete with reports of rock throwing and scattered gunfire. To the African-American community in many American cities, this is another example of police firing first and asking questions later when young black men are involved. There is another side to this, those who wonder why rioting and looting becomes the reaction. And both sides wonder what it says about the continuing effort on race relations in America. Let's welcome back to MidPoint, host of the Black Sphere radio program and a member of the Black Tea Party, also author of Sexy Brilliance and Other Political Lies, never without a hard opinion, Kevin Jackson. And we are joined on the phone by Baptist minister, radio and TV host, and former president of the Garland, Texas chapter of the NAACP, C.L. Bryant. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Let me begin by letting you both hear a soundbite, and this comes from Chief John Belmar of the St. Louis County Police. This was a press conference yesterday noting the police were doing their best to not make a tense situation even worse. Gentlemen, that's exactly what he said. Okay, now you can hear me. Let me tell you that we do not have the soundbite. My apology for that. So let me tell you right now that that is what they are trying to do in St. Louis. They're trying not to make a situation even worse. The first person I'm going to go to on this, CL, is why is it, and people want to ask themselves this question, when things like this happen, why is there rioting? Why is there looting? Why is there a faction of the community that feels that this is the way they need to lash out?
There is a shared victim mentality that has been cultivated by organizations like the NAACP, Al Sharpton, that does cause this type of reaction. A shared mentality of entitlement that causes a lack of respect for others' property because you feel that you're entitled to wreck it or destroy it if something happens to someone who is akin to you by color, if not by actual relationship. It is something that is false. It is a phenomenon in the American landscape at this point in time, and the wonder is, and the question has to be, will we ever get past this very shallow sea of color that all of us are sailing on at this point?
Kevin, I think that's part of it here. It is a shallow sea of color, as CL said, and there are many people wondering, how do you avoid this and why it continues to happen?
Well, I agree with what CL said, but I also think that it just speaks to the moral decay of society in general, and specifically the subculture of black society. And I think that people like Barack Obama and the minions that follow him and that vote on color and things like that are part of the problem. You're not going to hear Barack Obama come out and decry what's happening in the black community because of this tragedy. You're not going to hear the NAACP speak out about why do black people loot when something like this occurs. There's no reason to loot. You know, they looted during Katrina, and you could say to yourself, well, maybe they needed food and water and things like this. But when you see people carrying out 42-inch flat screen TVs that have no ability to be powered because they don't have electricity, you ask yourself, what is the culture that's created here? And the culture is they're getting theirs up at the top, so you know what? I need to get mine here at the bottom.
But how do you then change the culture? Because it's not as if this is something new. This has been happening for decades.
Yeah, it's been happening. Well, go ahead, CL.
I'm sorry, Kev, but and glad to be on with my friend Kevin Jackson. The culture is this, and it is one that is beginning to permeate throughout our society. It's like a little bit of leaven that is beginning to leaven the entire lump. There is a mentality in this country that somehow we have not, as Kevin said, gotten our just due. We're not getting what we deserve. And when they shoot down a kid like this, and the facts are not there as yet, there is an angst that's just below the surface, especially in inner city Africa America, that is just waiting to explode. And it is caused by this administration. It is caused by organizations that we've named like the NAACP. And I believe that it is by design. There is a design in this. There's an underclass that is there to create chaos at a drop of a hat.
Okay, what's the design and who's the designer?
The design has been on for the last 50 or 60 years to create that underclass. Since Lyndon Johnson began what was called his Great Society. That Great Society was to lock in a certain vote. And by locking in that certain vote, it has led this group of people to a place where they are right now. You can track it historically. The inner city family, 72%. That has no man in that house. The family is disintegrated. And so naturally, you have people now with no guidance. And this country is headed on the same track because we have a White House. We have the leader of the free world who offers no guidance, and certainly that shows up in the inner city.
Well, let me talk about the other side of this. Kevin, I want you to comment on that as well, but please also comment on this, if you will, here. If I'm going to play the other side of this story, and I think we have to, there are those people in the inner cities and African Americans who will say that the police will target young black Americans, and they will look at them specifically as criminals first and not necessarily with any sort of innocence whatsoever. Would you not agree that there is still that permeated opinion that rolls through many African American communities?
Well, look, blacks in black communities can say what they want, but the fact of the matter is there's an exorbitant amount of crime that occurs in those communities. And while we talk about this particular situation, I don't know how many black kids got killed in Chicago and Detroit and Atlanta and various other cities that aren't going to get any press. It's Trayvon Martin all over again. The fact is this: cops have a tough job, and that job is exponentially, certainly geometrically tougher in black communities. Why? Because black communities create crime. There's a reason why when you hear the term black community, you don't think Beverly Hills. You know, you understand what that means. That is part of your GPS avoidance system. You don't drive through there. You don't go there at night. You know when it's time to leave. If you happen to be there, you know when it's time to go in. So the idea that cops are just indiscriminately leaving their donut breaks to go target black citizens is ridiculous. We've created this problem through liberalism. And as CL alluded to, this is decades old. And the problem is nobody wants to talk about it. The NAACP, Barack Obama, the Congressional Black Caucus, nobody wants to say to black people, stop acting ignorant.
And when you talk about being targeted as criminals first, well, we're seeing examples of that when you have a shooting of a kid who we don't have the information on, but yet criminal activity breaks out first thing. So what do you decipher from that? Obviously, the activity of crime happened first.
And I want to add one other point, not to interrupt you, CL, but think about it this way. We don't know what's happened. We don't know the situation. They say this kid may have gotten into a battle to wrestle this cop's gun away. I don't know. But here's what I can tell you. Nobody's talked about what this kid is involved in. It's just like Trayvon Martin. They picture this, they depict this guy as a kid, like a 12-year-old kid who was minding his own business and he gets run upon by Zimmerman. In this case, they depict this guy as a guy who was minding his own business and suddenly the cops just showed up out of nowhere, targeted him and shot him. Now, I don't know what the details are. Well, here's what I will tell you. They won't tell you the real story behind this particular guy until they've milked all they can out of the situation that the cop shot this kid. It may turn out he was dealing drugs, he was suspected for robbery, whatever, I don't know. We've been told he was on his way to college the next day.
Okay, let me just interrupt here because I want to make sure that we get this in here. According to the chief of the St. Louis County Police Department, the officer tried to leave his vehicle just before the shooting, but the young man pushed him back into the car where he physically assaulted the police officer and struggled over the officer's weapon. A shot was fired inside the police car, and Brown was eventually shot about 35 feet away from the vehicle. That is reported and according to the St. Louis Police Department. So I've only got about a minute left here, though. Would you both not agree that there are reasons, certainly, for people to distrust what the police say? But as Kevin indicated as well, you do have to wonder exactly what happened still, and we still don't know the full answers as to what happened. There's been no investigation yet.
Well, there has not been an investigation, and it is necessary now for us to wait for those facts to come out. Kevin, I don't know if you've heard this, but I've gotten word off the street up there in St. Louis that the shooter may have been black. If that's the case, this changes some of the paradigm, the dynamic in this as well. And so there we go.
I predicted that he is black, because if he were white, it'd be a whole other element to the story. But they don't want to tell you that he's a black cop, because that doesn't play into the narrative. So right now it's cop versus black people versus white cop, and white people versus black people.
10 seconds left. I'm going to give it each 10 seconds now. First to you, Kevin. How do you turn this around?
I think it's a culture that unfortunately we're not going to turn around unless more voices like C.L. Bryant get out there.
C.L., you've been given some chops here. How do we turn this around then, and how do we start to solve this?
And, it's a love fest between Kevin and I. I think that more like him should be out there. And perhaps, Kevin, I will join you there in St. Louis. Maybe we can have a sit-down and we can talk to them in a town hall type of fashion.
Gentlemen, if the two of you do that, you let us know, because we want to be there and we want to make sure that we cover that while you're there. As always, Kevin and CL, we thank you so much for your time and your comments.
Thank you. Bye now.
Pleasure.
All right, it's a discussion that does need to go on, too. Later on this hour, the news media twisting and turning the Tony Stewart story into something much more nefarious than it obviously is, and a gullible public who falls for it. After the break, the GOP has a plan for women, and now to see if women agree with the idea. It's coming up on MidPoint, where we question everything.